All right. We are now going to talk through the Universal Design for Learning guidelines and how we can use those to change the world of teaching and learning. Again, we want to kind of start with our target. What is our goal? And our goal today is that we will describe Universal Design for Learning. The focus of this particular video is the UDL guidelines and going into some of the UDL checkpoints. So just do a quick self-assessment of where you are towards that goal on a 1 to 5 scale. If you haven't already done so, I encourage you to watch the UDL Foundations video that cover variability, context, and goals. Those are kind of the foundational beliefs with which we are using Universal Design for Learning to ground us in that understanding. But in this video, we're going to talk through the UDL Guidelines, which is multiple means of engagement, representation, and action and expression. Again, when we talked through the foundations, we said that there's variability, and that even more so, there's context. The situations that we're put in matter just as much as the variability we come into them with. And because of that, combined with the rigor of goals, it can expose or create barriers to learning and to teaching. And what UDL tries to do is to think through those learning barriers and prevent them, remove them, find ways around them, do anything so that we can have all of our students on every margin we can give them access. So the 3 guidelines, again, are multiple means of engagement here in the green, multiple means of representation in the purple, and multiple means of action and expression. Now, because of these different things, you don't try to do everything all at once, but it is important to think through each of these guidelines as a lens with which you're viewing the instruction and the learning experiences you are providing for our students. When we talk through multiple means of engagement, that's really where we should start because it answers the question for the students and the teachers and the learners, why should I even care about this? This is making connections. This is engaging in ways that provide different levels of engagement, whether that's group work or allowing choice. Once we have kind of hooked them and we've provided them a reason why should we even care about what we're learning, then it's important, especially on the teaching end, to think through multiple means of representation. What are we teaching and how can we represent it? Whether that is thinking through audio and visual cues, whether that's thinking through in what ways can we apply this to the real world, bringing in different representations within videos and pictures and the levels of symbolism moving from very concrete to very abstract. And then once we know we care about it, and once we know what we're teaching, how does the student then use that or show their knowledge? And that comes in with multiple means of action and expression. So for example, within engagement, it can come in a variety of ways. These are just some of them, but this is the affective part of our brain. So it's really honing in on like, why do I care about this? Why is it important to me? And it can come in a lot of different ways, whether we try to hop on the social media bandwagon, whether we're bringing in YouTube videos or Khan Academy videos. This is just a little thing from Fortnite because that is all the jazz with the kiddos these days, the hip kids. Obviously, I'm one of them. Anyway, and it is talking about like how they as a people, as a person, are going to use this. So they're a Sanger High Apache, for example. How would you use this as a Sanger High Apache in your real life? Some of these can come across as a little disingenuous, like I'm just going to toss in a Fortnite GIF and call it a day. But really, this is about how you know your students and what is going to engage and hook them. Some of the things that are not listed on here are just things that are engaging to almost all people, allowing choice, giving autonomy to make that choice, working in groups or working in partners, having ability to move around the classroom in a way that is a beneficial way for them to learn. When it comes to representation, we think through whatever the content or the topic, the main concept is, and how can we represent that concept in a variety of ways? Because one way is not going to be engaging, but it's also not going to allow for all of our students to understand it. So take, for example, Romeo and Juliet. One way that we could do that is just simply saying, okay, I still want them to read the text, but I'm going to allow them to read it as an audiobook. Or on their iPad, I'm going to allow them to download the text and they can use either a screen reader or they can use it in an audiobook fashion. Like it's still the text, but I'm allowing for different points of access. It could also, though, be this video here, which is like a puppet version of Romeo and Juliet. It could be a play They're going to act it out. It could be a graphic novel of the same content. It could be a movie adaptation, West Side Story, that has a similar feel about the main themes that are within Romeo and Juliet. Now, we're not saying that, like, if you were to only show this puppet movie, done, you've covered Romeo and Juliet, check it off, you're good to go. That's not at all the case. But we are saying that we're going to move through different representations and show a couple of them, show a few of them, and especially ones that move from the most concrete to the most abstract. Like, even a concrete example of Romeo and Juliet for a bunch of high schoolers would be like, hey, have any of your friends broken up because their families didn't get along? And going from there. So bringing in a real life, very concrete example, and then moving through to the more abstract, and not just jumping into Shakespeare and only doing Shakespeare text. So once we have the engagement and we're representing content in a variety of ways, we then move to action and expression, where students have a choice with how they want to create their understanding and show their understanding. This was an example in a math classroom. So students, you can see they had whiteboards and paper and pencil, but they also had iPads. Within those iPads, they were allowed to draw their own problem. And then you can actually see that some of them are recording their voice as they explain their problem. So there was a lot of variety of choice. They had different tools throughout the classroom that they were able to use. This wasn't like, okay, everybody, here's your whiteboard, here's how to use it. It was just that they had different tools available to them: paper, pencil, whiteboards, whiteboard markers, the iPad with a variety of apps, and then they were given the choice. Again, it is not a free for all. It is not choice for choice sake alone. It is saying that here are some different options, but you have to meet these things. You have to have achieved these non negotiables in order to show that you actually understand the content and of the concept that we're working with. This this is the Universal Design for Learning guidelines. In the live document of the guidelines is available here on this website. You can scan this QR code or go to udlguidelines.cast.org. CAST is the organization that's out of Massachusetts. That is the the brain trust that came up with Universal Design for Learning through lots of different research connected through Harvard and a bunch of other higher education. But anyway, this is the guidelines with each of these checkpoints. And we call this, like, there's a lot of different names for it, but we can call it the matrix. We can, I'm not even going to come up with different names, but they are the guidelines. And then each of these points, these dots, are the checkpoints. So for example, within multiple means of engagement, we have recruiting interest. How do we get them involved? How do we sustain that interest and create opportunities for persistence and grit? And then how do we self-regulate? How do we talk about metacognition and coping skills and self-assessment and reflection? When it comes to representation, a lot of these are perception, like the auditory video or the auditory and visual, customizing the display. Can they make the text larger? Can they make it smaller? Can they change the color of the text? Can they choose whether they watch it in a video or read it? Clarifying vocabulary and symbols, especially when we're talking about text, mathematical notation, and understanding across multiple languages. Illustrating through multiple media, so videos, audio, pictures, cartoons. And then comprehension, highlighting the critical features and the connections. And the last, action and expression, the checkpoints under them, is varying the methods of responsive navigation. So are they always having to write on a whiteboard, or are they allowed to speak it or make a quick video? Having access to tools, using multiple media for communication. The graduated levels of support is how we would talk through almost like a I do, we do, you do, or backwards, or working within groups and then pairs and then individually, but having some sort of gradual release. Providing time for guiding appropriate goal setting, planning how we make it to the eventual goal. And all of these are trying to make expert learners who are purposeful and motivated, resourceful and knowledgeable, and strategic and goal directed. Like, that's the goal. And one of the big criticisms is like, okay, I have a class of juniors. They're eventually going to college, and no one is going to hold their hand through that. No one is going to offer them lots of different displays. And the sad reality is that might be the case. College is actually now, and all education are learning about this. It is in every document from California. All of the different the name is failing me, but it's the scope. It is the documents that California creates to work through the standards. I'll come up with it later. But anyway, what we're saying is you're right. Like our students are going to be put in positions where they might not have had universal design for learning, and they might be giving it only in one boring way that they're not engaged with. It doesn't make sense to them representationally, and they're not able to choose how they show it through action and expression. So, what we're trying to do is exactly that. We're trying to set them up where even when the situation doesn't have these things, they are purposeful, motivated, resourceful, knowledgeable, strategic, and goal directed enough to come up with, like, okay, what is my game plan? When I am only being asked to show it in one way and it's not the way that I want, what are some different things that I know that I can do? So, we're giving them time to practice, time to become that expert learner, so that if they're ever in a situation where they don't have any flexibility, they're still able to be successful. So, what we're going to do, and I'm not going to talk through these, but if you have access to the Universal Design for Learning guidelines with engagement, representation, action, and expression, you're going to find the UDL guideline that would address the issue presented in this case study example. And even the little gifts of "to all the boys I've loved before," that's a subtle engagement strategy for our high school students. This is what this presentation was originally written for, a group of high school students. That hooked them enough that they were like, okay, I'll pay attention because I want to know what Laura Jean thinks. All right, so this is case study number 1, and I'm just going to let you read it. You can even pause the video here and think of which one it is. All right, the correct answer is actually falling under engagement and representation. It's a brand new topic, so how are we representing it? But then the students have their head down and they have to be reminded to focus. They're probably not engaged. Case study 2, and you can pause it and then I'll give the answer in a moment. So when we're talking about group work, it is an engagement strategy and talking through how we can appropriately work in groups. But then also it might fall under a little of action and expression. If they're being asked to do it in only one way and some of the students are off task, perhaps it's because they're not at all engaged in some of the ways that you're asking them. So are there other flexible means that they could do it while still meeting the goals? Case study number 3. This one would fall mostly under representation. When they're talking about the equation in their math notes, that's the math vocabulary, notations, and equations, and talking through like what is the meaning behind those. It's a very, very abstract concept. So how do we make it most concrete, and how do we show different representations so that they can understand how that math equation is appropriately used? Case study number 4. And again, hopefully you've had a chance to pause and think on your own. This would follow mostly under action and expression because that's how the students are showing their understanding. And you as a teacher have already known that they know the different ways because they can explain their causes and consequences in writing. But when you're asking them to deliver it in a speech, they're not able to do it. So that's where you can say like, no, it has to be a speech. Perhaps that's the goal. But how can we still be flexible with the tools and strategies? Can they present a speech, but it's a recording and they just play the video? Can they do it with like a puppet? I mean, given different, that might not be appropriate, but are there different flexible ways to even still do a speech, but allow for some flexibility of tools and strategies? Case study number 5. This would fall mostly under representation, as that is where clarifying vocabulary terms and meanings and the big understandings, that's where it falls in representation. And that is it. So our original goal was to describe universal design for learning. Obviously, we're not in a situation where you're in front of me and we can talk through this, but you could think of one way that teaching using the lens of UDL would change your world. And if you would, you don't have to actually do this, but if I were to ask a group of people to do this, I would then kind of show what we're or live what we're showing by saying you don't have to just say it out loud. You can make a drawing, you can type a note, you can record a video, you could do anything you choose as long as you are being able to describe universal design for learning in some way. And then because we want to show the importance of setting goals and then coming back to those goals, and especially in a closure situation where you haven't met the goal yet, like this is day one of a 5-day lesson or whatever, you have to come back in a closure and say, like, where are we towards the goal? Like, if we're not there, what do we need to focus on tomorrow? So think through and just have some moment of self reflection. We wanted you to be able to describe universal design for learning. How are you now after these 2 videos towards your ability with that goal? And that is all. Thank you so much. I'm going to stop this video. This was part 2, so this was the UDL Guidelines for Sanger Unified.